is accosted by some gang members, which feels like something out of Home Alone 2, and it doesn't really go anywhere. And then, like, for me, the biggest problem, and this actually, I think, derailed the entire experience. I could have forgiven everything else, but the creature design for the elves is absurd. Like, it's just
eggnog
CGI. They're stupid characters. The only funny part is that they speak Elvish and are just kind of a bunch of buffoons, but they simply do not fit into the visual design of the rest of the movie. So when they show up 3/4 of the way through, it takes you out of the story. And I will say, maybe I'm biased here, but Kurt Russell's portrayal of Santa Claus is a great one, and I'd love to see him in the role with a better script.
So as a minor detour, I think that most cinephiles will agree that back when George Lucas readdressed his early Star Wars films to re-edit them and modify them, that it was inappropriate. Once you make a movie, it's done.
Yeah.
But sometimes you see a movie where there's something that bothers you so much that you wonder, is this going to be a good movie if someone fixes it? Does The Christmas Chronicles have too many script issues that the elves couldn't just be replaced someday and then it'd be okay?
Yeah, too many script issues.
Oh, that's too bad.
There are some great scenes. There's a really funny scene when Santa Claus goes into a bar and he doesn't have any form of transportation. He's got these two kids tagging along. It's very early in the movie, so I'm not ruining it for you because I know you haven't seen it yet. But because he's Santa Claus, he knows everything. He's going up to these different people to ask them for a ride and trying to convince them based on his knowledge of their personal lives. And it's very funny because everybody's sort of creeped out.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, but no, unfortunately, I don't think the movie is – it's not fixable in the way that would make it a classic.
Could have been great.
Yeah, could have been great.
That's too bad.
Okay, what's your number two?
My number two.
Yeah.
My number two.
That's not a number.
When did Jack Frost come out? I have the year wrong.
Who cares?
No, this was like a late 90s movie, right?
Yeah, maybe like 99?
98.
Actually, I was at the Warner Brothers studio lot when I was looking at colleges in 2000 or 2001.
Right.
And they said this is where Jack Frost was filmed, and they told us how they made the snow out of like dried potato flakes or something.
Fake snow.
Fake snow, yeah.
Okay, so the 1998 Jack Frost was a huge disappointment to me because this is another case where I have super high expectations based on either the source material or the leading actor, or in some cases the filmmakers. This stars Michael Keaton as Jack Frost, and at this point in the late 90s, Michael Keaton could do no wrong. Obviously, there's Batman, which was the initial introduction into my movie cultural portfolio. You've also got, obviously, Beetlejuice. But Mr. Mom, Multiplicity, which gets mixed reviews, but I love Multiplicity. But Michael Keaton is my Batman, and for those of us that love Michael Keaton, we get to see him kind of on a bit of a comeback. I mean, he's always been working, but he's really kind of been doing a lot more interesting things lately. But anyway, even in 1998, I was a freshman in high school. I had super high expectations for this movie. I love Christmas. I love Christmas movies. I love Michael Keaton. It's the same thing with your expectations with The Christmas Chronicles. And this was a huge letdown. It was creepy. It was weird. The premise is the main character, Michael Keaton's character. I guess he's not the main character. I guess maybe his son is the main character. But that's one of the first mistakes. Michael Keaton's not the main character of the movie. He's the title character. He dies in the first act. For those of you that haven't seen it, spoiler alert, he dies in the first act.
You're supposed to tell them the spoiler alert before you spoil it.
And then he's reincarnated, I think if I remember correctly, it's a year later, as a snowman in their front yard.
Of course.
And then he goes on all these adventures with his kids. So we have this haunted snowman who is not charming in terms of its design. It's just terrifying because it's an animatronic snowman who's magically been embodied by the ghost of these kids' dead father. Yeah. It was a huge letdown. It's very weird, very strange. I think that there's a sequel that's like a deliberate horror comedy that I never saw. I don't know. There's a Jack Frost 2, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, that sounds vaguely familiar. Like, I feel like that actually wasn't a sequel, but they just called it Jack Frost 2, and it was like an R-rated comedic horror movie.
In the case of Jack Frost, it tried to have some heart, and it just ended up being very creepy.
Very quick aside here. I said that I was at the Warner Brothers lot in the late 90s or early 2000s. If anybody's listening here, I'm going to start a rumor because when I was on the tour, we went on to the set of two different movies. One was Collateral Damage with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that was kind of fun. And the other, they drove us through the pre-production, the sets that they were building for The Goonies 2.
What?
Yeah.
It was actually in production enough to be building a set?
Well, it was in pre-production. So I don't know if it had been greenlit, but I guess maybe the studio started investing money in it. But they took us into this like jungle area, and they said that Goonies 2 is going to be shooting here soon. And nothing ever came from it. But like you look this up online. I've tried, and I can't find any evidence that this movie was even in pre-production. But I would bet a ton of money on the fact that that's what at least the tour guide told us, and that's not the sort of thing that would have come out of nowhere.
So either somebody somewhere has information on a Goonies 2 production that started building sets, or the tour guide was completely wrong.
Yeah, or I think. My sense is that there are a lot of movies that go into pre-production and just don't end up getting greenlit. Okay, so my number 2 is Polar Express, Robert Zemeckis movie, and it came out before A Christmas Carol, like maybe 2 years earlier. And I will say that just like Christmas movies, the book, The Polar Express, is just an essential element for my version of Christmas. It's something you can't have Christmas without the Polar Express. It is a perfect book by Chris Van Allsburg, gorgeously illustrated. And to his credit, Robert Zemeckis recreated some of the illustrations in that book perfectly on screen. But the problem is that they blew it out into whatever it was, like 85, 90.
It was a $100 million budget.
No, not the budget, the number of minutes. It's not a long movie. So I think there was a fantastic movie that Robert Zemeckis could have made that would have been 30 minutes maybe. Mm-hmm. But that's not how Hollywood works, right? You can't put a 30-minute movie in the theaters. So instead, you end up with all these strange characters. Like, I don't know who the hell that hobo was on top of the train. Nothing to do with the book. The Polar Express, as it's going towards the North Pole, becomes increasingly haunted, which really bothered me because in the book, it's sort of just a page between when they're being served nougat and having a grand old time and when suddenly in the distance they see the North Pole. You don't have to go through all the treachery of the ice shelves and going down basically a roller coaster and flying off the tracks and all that garbage. It was just like an extra 20-minute sequence or 15-minute sequence for no purpose. And then when they get to the North Pole, which in a movie about the North Pole and about Santa Claus is just critical, like you have to get this right, it became this terrifying place like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. All the elves had left, so everything was abandoned. They're in these cavernous rooms with echoing Christmas music playing. The kids get lost. There's nobody there to help them. The North Pole just seems like an awful place. And, oh God, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Let's keep going. Let's go because we're aligned on the number one.
Well, the last thing, one thing I'll add on the Polar Express, and I'll withhold most of my commentary because I actually have more to say about this movie in another episode. But while I do see a lot of problems with this movie that are in line with some of my feelings about the Zemeckis Christmas Carol, I do think there's more to this movie. But we'll talk about that later.
All right. I disagree. But I do want to say, and the off chance, the offest of off chances that Robert Zemeckis ever hears about this, that I think he is one of the all-time great directors, which made this movie a bigger disappointment for me. So there's that. Cover that base. Let's go. We're agreed on our biggest disappointment here.
All right. Yeah. So our biggest disappointment is another sequel for me and another sequel for you. In this case, it's Santa Claus 2. That's Santa Claus with an E.
Yeah. Which wasn't a sequel for either one of us. It was a sequel to the original.
Right. Well, it's
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you.
On our list.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Santa Claus 2 was a movie that I think it took – I can't remember exactly. I'm pretty good with movie dates, but I think it took like 5 years to make. I remember sitting in United Artists in Bethesda, which is no longer there. And there was a teaser for the Santa Claus 2. It was called the Santa Claus 2: The Escape Clause, which ended up being the name of the third movie. And the brief footage was from the opening sequence of the Santa Claus 2, where they're flying over the North Pole and they hear Christmas music playing. But it was clear that that's all they had filmed. They had no script. And so the movie took forever to get into production. But let's talk about why it was such a big disappointment.
Yeah, you're right. It was 8 years between the two films. 94 was the Santa Claus, and the Santa Claus 2 was 2002. So very, very late. The problem with this movie, other than being a mediocre execution on a great property, the first one is so good that it has to live up to this excellent movie. Mm-hmm. And it missed out on a great deal of the character development and the heart that the first one had, and it just went right for very shallow plot lines.
Yeah.
What's wrong with it? I mean, the second one is really just about him getting a wife.
Oh, see, okay, so you have a different opinion about why it's bad than I do.
Well, I mean, I have other opinions. I mean, that was the first one that came to mind.
Okay, so I actually think so I'll say about the first one, and as Ian said, in the forthcoming episode, we'll talk more about this. But the first one was a really magical movie. And for me, it was successful because it created a new version of the Santa Claus mythology, which felt interesting and fresh. So I think there actually was an interesting story to tell about him finding a Mrs. Claus. Like that could have been a funny story. But for me, there were three problematic elements. One is that David Krumholtz was either not in it or barely in it. Like the character of Bernard, it was such an essential part of the first one. And David Krumholtz is a very funny actor who actually shows up in Harold and Kumar 3, which we'll talk about later. I feel like we keep telling people we're going to talk about things later. But I thought he was important to the success of the original. Two was the creepy, like Tim Allen replacing himself with a toy version of Santa.
Right. I forgot about that.
Turns into this like really weird
reindeer farts,
like fascist story about
because he militarizes the North Pole.
Right. Like what the hell? These kids aren't going to understand that. It's not funny. It's not clever. It's just creepy.
Right. Because he's too busy and he needs essentially a clone. He needs a surrogate.
He needs a clone so that he can actually do the work and go find his wife at the same time.
Right.
Which could have been really funny. Like if they had just put Tim Burton. Tim Burton. Tim Burton belongs in Halloween movies. Tim Allen as Tim Allen, like as his Santa Claus as the clone, rather than doing like the weirld toy version of it.
Right. If it had been like a multiplicity where you had a dumber, hornier version of Santa Claus.
Yeah. I don't know why they said hornier. But
well, because in multiplicity that happens. He has the dumber, hornier clone.
Oh. Yes, I know. Okay. And then for me, the third thing was it was really important that his son in the first movie was at an innocent age, right? Where he was at this moment where he either believed in Santa Claus or he didn't, and he was given proof that magic exists and Santa Claus exists and the North Pole exists. And they bring him back in Santa Claus 2 as this rebellious, like, jerk teenager. And no offense to the kid who played him. What was his name?
Eric Lloyd.
Eric Lloyd, right. Eric Lloyd. Right. I remember him. It was not a well-written part for him.
Yeah.
It felt out of place.
And David Krumholtz is in it, but Bernard is just underwritten. And Bernard is critical to the series because he legitimizes the universe. He knows all the rules.
Right.
He knows how everything works.
Right.
He explains what's going on for both Tim Allen's character and the audience.
Yeah.
So without him playing a more significant role, the film seems like an illegitimate entry into the series.
Right, yeah.
Both in their universe and in ours.
Yeah, and I can't remember why he wasn't in this one as much. That's right. I vaguely remember him being briefly in it. I think Spencer Breslin was the character, like the like chubby elf with glasses. Curtis, right. They have him replace Bernard a little bit, and then Curtis, I think, is in the third one. Do you want to talk about why the third one disappointed you?
So the third one disappointed me because let me back up a little bit. I do like the third one much more than the second one. Mm-hmm. It is a better movie. Yeah. But the reason that it's a better movie is because they go back to their roots. They recognize